Hey everyone, and welcome to Voices of Hope. I'm Ross Wilsey.
And I'm Mike Wade.
Each episode, we sit down to talk about what it means to live well, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and beyond.
We'll look at how wellness shapes us as individuals, families, communities, and even the wider world around us.
Through real stories and honest conversations, we'll explore what hope looks like and how it grows right here in the New River Valley.
Thanks for joining us. This is Voices of Hope.
Keith Cartwright is the Adverse Childhood Experiences, or ACEs, coordinator for the Virginia Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services. He leads a statewide effort to raise awareness of how early childhood experiences shape lifelong health and wellness, helping train over 600 presenters across Virginia. Keith is passionate about the healing power of human connection, and he enjoys exploring the intersection of trauma, resilience, faith, and connection through writing. Above all, he treasures being the father of 2 teenage sons.
Well, Keith, welcome to the show. Good to have you on the Voices of Hope podcast.
I'm grateful to be here, but excited.
Yeah, so we're going to jump right in. We've already shared with our audience that you work with Virginia DBHDS. Can you tell us a little bit more about your specific role within the organization?
Yeah, so I am the Adverse Childhood Experiences Coordinator, ACEs. And in that role, I, first and foremost, partner with all of our 40 community service boards like yourselves. And my role in that interaction with them is to, as much as I can, help them integrate the understanding of ACEs, trauma-informed care, which I know we'll talk more about, into their work with their communities from a prevention standpoint. Then I also work closely with a lot of the trauma-informed care networks across the state. And then I'm fortunate too, I get to do a lot of speaking, teaching, and training throughout the state. But all of it centered around helping communities understand the implication of our childhood experiences on long-term health and wellness, and just how that fits into so much of the work all of us like you all do here in New River Valley.
Right. Mm-hmm. So can you tell me a little bit about how you got into the field, how you found yourself wanting to do this type of work?
Completely unpredictable, really, in terms of, especially when I talk about this work I do now around ACEs. I tell the story a lot that my first work experience was I went to work out of college working with at-risk kids in a wilderness setting. And these were some really challenging young people. But I say back then, and this is early 1990s, I don't remember anybody ever using the word trauma. I know I never heard anybody use the word ACEs. But these kids were filled with ACEs and filled with trauma. So to be at this place I'm at today, where this is just my focus in life, is surprising. I started with the state 10 years ago. Almost my entire focus at that time was around, substance abuse prevention. But I found myself at a conference in Northern Virginia, and one of the breakout sessions was on ACEs. And, the presenter presented a lot of research around the original Adverse Childhood Experiences study. Folks can Google that, back in the early 90s. And, at the heart of that research was this reality that folks who have really challenging childhood experiences are at risk for a lot of poor health outcomes down the road,
right.
Not the least of which was addiction. And I just remember sitting there hearing this connection for the first time. And I tell people when I speak that I left there feeling like my life had just changed. And I had no idea at the time the magnitude with which that change would be. But part of it was reflecting back on all those young people I'd worked with, having no idea. Like intuitively, people have been through hard stories in childhood.
Right.
Like there's It offers some sort of understanding to what they're going through now, but not near sort of this relationship that the research showed.
Right.
And then the other thing was that I'd experienced my own hard childhood experiences, and I'd had my own struggles along the way, including alcohol abuse. And for the first time to be making that connection in my own personal life, that was pretty powerful. So, but I left that conference and went back to Richmond, and I went into my boss's office, the following day, or I think is the weekend after the weekend. And I said to Gail, that was my boss at the time, I said, I just heard something. And I said, if we don't include this in this work we're doing in prevention around the state, best case scenario is we're leaving something really important out. Worst case scenario is we're doing everything all wrong. And today I believe I lean closer to we were doing a lot wrong by not having conversations in communities that include trying to understand what people have been through. It's one thing to try to prevent people from some of the things we're trying to prevent them from doing or experiencing, but to do that without trying to understand where they're coming from, that handicaps us in our prevention work. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, the three of us all work under the umbrella of behavioral health wellness, which up until a few years ago was traditionally referred to as prevention services, at least here in Virginia. But of course, some of our listeners may not be familiar with either of those terms.
Yeah.
So for someone out there who may be listening and asking themselves, why should I care about this stuff?
yeah.
The stuff that these guys are talking about, what would you say to them?
Yeah. Well, one, I want to address those two terms a little bit and kind of my own evolution. I came into this work 10 years ago and it was prevention.
Right.
But I remember a conversation we were having with some consultants early in that work, and they kind of asked us, thinking outside the box, if you could do anything in prevention, what would you do? And I said, I would get rid of the word prevention. And like my whole team was sitting there looking like, what are you talking about? Like we didn't see that coming. And I said, well, here's the thing, like prevention seems very defensive minded to me. Like when I hear prevention, I actually visualize people standing in front of someone trying to prevent them from doing something. I like talking about prevention in terms of promoting wellness, because a lot of the times the things we're trying to prevent people from doing, and we're doing that for good reason, like some of the things folks turn to become very destructive for themselves and for their communities. But many times they're not turning to those things because nobody has stood in front of them and said, absent somebody standing in front of them saying, don't do this. Many times it's because for whatever reason, they haven't turned to some wellness practices in their own life, or maybe they're missing things in their life that would promote wellness, whether that's food or finances or all sorts of things that would help a life be more well, that would prevent them from turning to things that would be unwell. And so from a community standpoint, why that's important is, once we can look around and figure out what are some things we can do to help our community be more well, that in turn helps us prevent them from turning to things that are very destructive for a lot of communities, not just in Southwest Virginia, but I see it all around the state. And so I think it's far more helpful in that endeavor to not spend a lot of time figuring out how do we prevent this and how do we prevent that, but more how do we bring wellness to our community.
It seems like it's right in line with what Mike and I are trying to do. So you may have already answered this, so if so, no problem. But you've clearly established yourself as a champion of trauma-informed care and ACEs. Aside from being connected to your job, why do those issues matter so much to you?
I would say I share this a lot So when I went back to Gail and said, hey, we've got to really incorporate ACEs into our work, and her being the leader she was, did a wonderful thing. She said, okay, well, if it's important, go do something about it. Like, she gave me the freedom to go. And we brought a company to Virginia to train several cohorts of trainers. And this company was ACE Interface. The founder of ACE Interface was Dr. Robert Anda. He was one of the principal investigators of the original Adverse Childhood Experiences study. And I'll be forever blessed that he was the man who taught me about this work, because some of the first words out of his mouth were that he considers this work the science of empathy. Now, when he said that the first time, I thought, oh, this is just some quacked out doctor throwing out. Like, but now I get it as much as I know he felt it when he said that, because, once you start understanding that when people experience hard things, especially in childhood, not only does it leave a lasting impression on their life, but it literally changes their biology. It changes their brain development, their wiring. And so years down the road, when we have complicated engagements with somebody, for me, it's become personally more difficult to experience hard things with people without wondering, what have they been through in life? Because that's what ACEs tells us. What we have been through, especially, again, early in life, has strong influences on what we become, right? How we behave, the choices we make. And I don't ever say that to excuse people's, unhealthy choices in life. But you can't judge and heal people at the same time. You just can't do it. Right. So, and let's just take, for example, addiction, and I'll use my own personal story, alcohol. I tell people that for 25 years I abused alcohol, and people were very clear with me that I had an alcohol problem. Mm-hmm. But nobody was ever very curious about where was that coming from. Right. Were there things in life that you had experienced that maybe you were turning to this as some way of coping with that or dealing with that? And again, I don't say that to excuse my choices. Like, the destruction done in those choices is never going to be excused away or undone. But it has taught me this, because now my life's mission is to help heal people in similar spaces, whether it's alcohol, drugs, gambling, all sorts of things that we turn to help, ease the pains of life. If your mission is to heal, you got to get beneath this thing that we're trying to heal and be curious about the story that led there. So from a very personal standpoint, I think we're a culture that has a bit of a poverty when it comes to compassion and empathy. Mm-hmm. I believe this work helps people get to a more compassionate and empathetic place, because once you understand the science and the research behind where the roads lead when people experience some challenging and harsh childhoods and adolescence, you can't help but be a little more empathetic and a little more curious. I tell groups all the time, I've come to believe we are all just a culture, a world of people wrestling with our childhoods with each other without understanding what the real wrestling match is going on here.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
So that's why it's become really important to me.
Well, and thinking about the science, if it is true, which I don't see any evidence that it's not, that your brain physically changes with trauma, that's such a huge revelation that has only recently been part of the discussion, right? And now that needs to shape where we go and what the kind of efforts we're putting our energy into, right?
Yeah, it's only been in the last 20 years where science has even taken us to a place where we can kind of see what's happening inside the brain. But even there, I don't proclaim to be a neuroscientist. I'll never be a scientist. But if you talk to people and you understand, if you grow up in a home where you experience constant fear, right? For an example, because there are a lot of kids who grow up in a home where they're fearful of the adults in that home. It makes sense then that your brain would be wired to anticipate every adult is going to be someone I should be fearful of. And so if that's the case, a young person growing up in a fearful home is going to go into a school classroom not trusting that adult in there. And so then what happens, right? And I share this a lot, that if I have a pattern that anticipates this environment is going to be chaotic or violent or, disturbing, because that's my pattern. I've grown up in patterns anticipating that that's what this is going to be. But then I walk into a classroom that is very orderly and very calm and very peaceful. What is that young person going to do? Well, the brain is always trying to make sense of what's happening by referring to the patterns and the memories you already have. And so if a young person who only has patterns that are disordered, right, or chaotic, walks into a place that meets none of those, one way to solve that problem is to make this environment, this classroom, look like patterns I have. And that's a very difficult thing for us to understand, but that is how the brain works. The brain is always trying to make sense of what it is sensing. And if it can't do that, right, it's going to, one way or another, ideally the patterns match.
Yeah.
But if that can't be, I will make the environment match the pattern. But this gets back to what we were talking about earlier. An empathetic approach to that isn't going to start with this is an acting out, rude, violent, irrational kid, even though there's clearly some challenges going on here. It starts by asking questions. What is really going on here?
Yeah.
Maybe this is a kid who this is a totally new environment. And adults understand that. If any of us three, all of us adults, walk into an environment that's new to us or doesn't make sense to us, we're going to feel something in that. And so I say all that to say, yeah, there is a lot of brain science, there's brain imaging, a lot that's going on to help us make sense of this. But we don't need all of that to make sense of it either. Like we all as adults kind of understand this to a degree when you start thinking about it.
When you bring up the science and all the other research that's gone into this, it makes perfect sense. But I also recognize too that it may be a little much for the average person to try to comprehend.
Absolutely.
Or to latch onto. So without digging too far into the weeds with that kind of thing, for someone that's just perhaps out there listening that is a community member that recognizes there are things that need to be addressed, how do those community members, how does a community in some simple, maybe low-hanging fruit ways become more trauma-informed?
Yeah. That's, especially in my role, I get asked a lot questions like that. I get asked to define what is trauma informed care. For me, it's pretty simple, Mike. Everybody shows up with their whole life, right? There's three of us sitting here. I don't know, between us, we probably have 140, 150 years of living, maybe more. It's easy to think it's just our today self sitting here. Yeah. But no, the three of us collectively have 100 and some years of lived experiences. And if you want to even break that down into days, think of all the individual days of experiences we bring here. Trauma-informed care to me is just realizing everybody brings their whole self. And so, again, sometimes if you and I were to have some sort of challenging engagement right here, it would be easy to think this is all about what's happening right here.
Yeah.
But sometimes we bring things to the table that something I say may have triggered something from your past. I may have experienced something emotionally in my past that just got triggered in this experience right here. We promoted this book throughout Virginia, What Happened to You? Right. Dr. Bruce Perry, Oprah Winfrey. And the whole idea behind the book is we're really good as a culture too good sometimes, is saying, what is wrong with you? And we see people behave, and we see people make choices. And again, I'm not even being overcritically about that. Like, yeah, this kind of looks wrong. But trauma-informed care is trying to move us to this place of curiosity, of wondering, what happened to you? And again, I get accused of it a lot, of, trying to make excuses for people, but no, I'm not trying to make excuses for people. But if what somebody has been through is contributing to the choices they're making now, my best avenue to helping them is being curious about what they have been through. And trust me, I've experienced this enough now. When people get to talk about what they have been through, it's healing. It's helpful. They say that. They'll express that. So from a community standpoint, one word comes up to me. It's curiosity. Let's be more curious about what folks have been through. I talk with you all a lot about your HOPE campaign and the recovery courts. And, I have this calendar that you all sent me,
Right.
that you made. And every month there's another story. And they're all people who have made some really unhealthy choices in life. But I think about that calendar. What if that calendar was just a calendar of 12 people defined by these unhealthy choices they made in life?
Right.
But that's not what this calendar is. This calendar is a link to what they have been through in life, right? And many of them, what they have done to overcome the struggles in life. We don't get that from our community if we just judge people by the choices they're making.
Right.
We get it by being curious about what they have been through. And that serves two purposes. When you understand what people have been through, you're in a much better, empathetic, more compassionate space to help heal them. But the other thing is when you start hearing stories of what people have been through, you can look around and know, well, there's other young people in my community at risk of going through that same thing. And what can we do to prevent them from going through that same thing this person went through that led to some unhealthy choices down the road? None of that happens without curiosity. So trauma-informed care to me is just an increased sensitivity to what people have been through in life, with a grander understanding that has influence on who they become and the choices that they make later in life.
Curiosity with empathy, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting.
So the three of us are fortunate enough to be fathers, but at least in my case, I don't think, I could probably guess for y'all too, I don't think any of us would say we have the whole dad thing figured out completely. What is the biggest thing for you that being a father has taught you?
That's a tough one. And not because I can't think of anything, it's because I can think of so many things.
Right.
But I thought about this before we started having this conversation. Two things come to mind. And one of them I actually learned before becoming a father, but it just really exploded once I became a father. I had a supervisor once when I was working with these young kids, and these were some challenging young people. And supervisor pulled me aside one day and he said, "You really ought to try something different." And I said, "Well, clearly this ain't going so well, so I'm all ears." He said, "You ought to try catching them doing something right." And I'm like, "Well, if they ever did something right, maybe I'd catch them." He said, "Well, maybe you're not looking hard enough." And so I did. I became focused, not immediately, but eventually I gave in to his advice and just started catching kids doing really small things right and noticing what a huge impact that had on them.
Wow.
We had this dress code of sorts, and kids had to have their shoes tied when they came into the dining hall. And I had one young man who every meal, I had to stop the group and say, Mikey, would you tie your shoes? They're not going to let us in here to eat if your shoes aren't tied. And, 50% of the time that would then explode into a much bigger problem. And I remember walking up to the dining hall one day and looking down, and Mikey's shoes were tied. And so I called the group together. Of course, they were all antsy, thinking, oh, here we got a problem before it's time to eat. I said, no, guys, this ain't a problem. I said, I just want to stop and thank Mikey. He's got his shoes tied. I said, I appreciate you being responsible, thinking ahead, coming in here. Of course, that wasn't what he was thinking, but I thanked him and put that in him. And of course, he played tough in front of the group, in front of the gang. Like he just kind of blew it off like I wasn't even acknowledging him. But after that day, I tell people this, never had to tell him to tie his shoes ever again.
Really?
Never once. It's because I caught him doing something that seemed small in my world, but it was huge in his world. It was huge because my supervisor was right. Everybody in the world was good at catching these kids doing something wrong. The difference was going to be somebody who could come in and be, and it wasn't eyes open enough, but intentional enough about catching them doing something right. I carried that into fatherhood. I made it a mission to catch because then you all know, our boys are going, whatever, boys and girls, they're going to give us plenty of opportunity to correct.
Yeah.
But what they need most is knowing they have people in their life going to catch them doing the right thing. And I've seen the same thing happen in my boys' life. When I catch them doing something right, I see them repeating that over and over because they want to hear that. So, and I think that's true of whether we get in leadership positions. Mm-hmm. When you become the supervisor, your staff wants you to catch them doing something right. Whether it's in a, marriage relationship. What do we want? We just want somebody to acknowledge we did something right. Because there's always going to be opportunity for it to come to life when we haven't done something right. So that's one thing I think. And the other thing that fatherhood has taught me is to listen. And that's probably a correction from, my own upbringing. I had a dad who, the kid's role was to listen.
Right.
And that didn't work out so well in my personal, because it ended up me being, I listened, but then I got too afraid to talk, And so with my boys, I've always wanted to be, I'm here. I mean, you go hear me when you need to.
Yeah.
But I'm here to listen. Because again, getting back to, the trauma and the science, one of the things we have found out is that if you hold on to hard stories in your life, if you experience hard things, and that's one of the main reasons these adverse childhood experiences become so difficult, is because we experience things and they become memories and they become stories that we don't tell to anybody else. So they just live in us, and they live in us as a really challenging memory many times. And it turns out that has real strong mental, emotional, and physical health implications. It's hard to hold on to things. So one way of preventing that with our kids is letting them know there's nothing you have to hold on to.
Right.
And you do that by being somebody who not just tells them, I'll listen to you. Because trust me, my boys have come home with some things where my instinct wasn't going to be, I'm going to hear you out on this.
Yeah.
I'm going to listen. Instinct is, I want to talk. I want to lecture. I want to impose.
Yeah.
But I know, and I've got one now, my oldest is now off to college, and so I'm not in his life every day. My big hope is that I have listened enough up to this point that if he starts to encounter some of the adult struggles, right, some of the more challenging struggles sometimes in life, that because of the way I listened as he was growing up, that I'll be one of the first phone calls he makes now. So catch him doing something right and listen.
And listen without judgment. I'm sure that that's something you're good at. Just knowing the little I know about you. I mean, because I can listen to my kid and I can kind of, snicker about something or make him feel bad about what he's telling me.
Yeah.
And that's going to have the opposite effect, right?
Yeah. But why is that so important? Because again, and this is why it's all so powerful to me you can understand the brain science, but you don't need to, because what we experience in childhood shapes the way we interact and the way we relate going forward. And how many of us want to be listened to with judgment?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah.
As adults.
Yeah.
So why is it so important for a child to be listened to without judgment? Because then going forward, they can be somebody in a relationship who, one, listens without judgment, and two, believes that I will be heard without judgment. And can you imagine how much more open a community would be with one another if that was the standard? Everybody gets to share and hear without judgment.
Right.
And again, that doesn't mean without consequence. And again, people think you try to, no, but it's just healthier when we all have a space where we can share without judgment.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think providing a safe space for our kids, even when they're adults, if things don't go maybe the way that they planned or the way that they had hoped, and to overcome the fear of potentially disappointing their parents, to know that, hey, you can talk to me. I'm going to listen. It's a safe space.
Yeah.
I may have some thoughts about how you could have handled it better if you want those. But, to be able to talk and to be able to listen, as you said, I think is just so important. And to be curious, genuinely, about what is not going well or what they're proud of,
And that just reminds me of, I said this a lot as a dad. One thing that helped me as a dad is to realize I don't have a clue.
Yeah.
Because when you do believe you have all the answers, you're going to be more judgmental when your kids come. Right. So just understand there's probably more value in me hearing where they're coming from, because that's where you get a real chance to father, to guide, when you hear where your kids are coming from. So you can offer advice, offer counsel to what they're openly sharing with you. Judgment will make sure you get very limited opportunities in that.
Absolutely.
Hearing them out, and even sometimes hearing out things you don't agree with, reinforces the chances you're going to get down the road to keep hearing where they're coming from. It burdens me more to think there's a day that my kids will not share with me because of fear of what I might say, than thinking about them coming with whatever it is, even if I may disagree with it. Thinking of them for the rest of their life, feeling free to come share with me no matter what. That's more inviting to me than them just feeling burdened or compelled to be or respond to exactly who I think they are supposed to be or should be.
So we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about things that you do in your daily life to maintain your own personal wellness.
Whew, not enough. I'd say top of that list for me is writing. I start every day with writing. Writing has become very healing for me. I shared something with my youngest son. His birthday was recently, and I wrote something reflecting on his birth a little bit. And I don't always share what I write with my boys, but I shared this with Ian, and he sent me a message back, which is very unlike Ian, but he said, "Thank you, love you, Dad." But then a very separate second message came after that. He said, "You're a good writer." I said, "Well, growing up, I was not always good. Even as an adult, have not always been good at sharing what I feel, share what I'm thinking." I said, so writing has just become my avenue to do that. Writing's very healing for me. It's why I'm a big believer in journaling. I'm a very big believer in any sort of writing practice, even if you don't share it, even if you don't want to write a book. And it goes back to this idea that, the more burdens we hold on to, the more complicated our life gets. And so maybe you aren't good at sharing everything with somebody, there's a lot of evidence to sports. Even if I just write it out on a piece of paper, that's releasing it from. So writing's big to me. Big hiker. Went through a phase until about 2 years ago as a big runner, ultra marathoner. My body gave out and said, no, you're not. No, you're not. So now I just do a lot of walking. But even with the walking, I do it now I do it with a lot more purpose. Try to embrace silence in it. And so, and there are some days I'll walk with my headphones and listen to some music, but most of the time I'm very intentional about walking in quiet, and just being still and quieting the world as much as possible. Because again, the work I've done in the trauma sphere tells us that, a lot of things we experience can lead to us experiencing noisy lives.
Right.
By that I mean, internal noise, but a lot of people have traumatic experience that makes what may just be ordinary noise to you and me sound very loud and chaotic to others. So be intentional about finding ways to quiet. And so with that, I also do a lot of prayer in my life as a way that I find, not just connection to my God, but then quiet and peace. So those are my avenues.
I like it.
Nice. I was just on a walk like last week or something, and I usually do have headphones in. And I forgot to grab them and didn't have them in, and I was just so happy with how it turned out. I was like, hey, man, I should do this more often, because I really did. I was able to focus and think about things that I needed to process through. And
it's such a great message for our communities, Ross, because, in the work we're in, we rightfully spend a lot of time brainstorming what are these things we can do or create to help our community. And listen, I'm a big fan of that. But there are also some very cheap, free things our community, and some things they're already doing, but just aren't thinking about them the right way. And walking is one of those things. I know a lot of people who walk. Okay, can you walk once or twice a week without the headphones? Just walk and focus on being still. Focus on just listening to your own feet hit the ground. Like there's just something life-giving about that. Or can you walk with friends? Can you get a group of you together and walk and talk and share and talk about life when you're doing that? There's, my big passion these days is fostering healing-centered connections. Because what I've come to understand about trauma and hard experiences as I talk to groups, we've all had them. We are all wrestling with something. And there's no greater avenue to help cope with that or help heal from that than connection with one another. So what a beautiful thing to get a walk in, physically healthy, but then do it with some other people and get that connection time.
Yeah. We were talking earlier before the podcast about being stuck, and I was just thinking, as you were talking about being stuck and how to get unstuck and things like that, that's, to me, I'd never thought about hope in that way, but to me, that was hope at one point in my life, is like, I'm not stuck anymore. And like waking up and knowing I'm not stuck was hope. Can you tell me, hopefully I didn't steal your answer, but what does the word hope mean to you?
Yeah, it is kind of similar, but hope to me is what's getting me out of bed today? Because listen, I've been in a period of my life where I just did not want to get out of bed. Spent some time thinking about not getting out of bed. So hope to me is what's getting me up today? Because we're all going to face that, right? All of us listening to this, all of us tomorrow morning, what's going to get me out of bed? And ideally have that something that calls to me. Like there's a difference between I have to get out of bed and I have to go do this. Hope in my life, and trust me, I have some of those things in my life, but I write every morning. I've told people, man, sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, like ready to get up because I have something I want to write about.
Yeah.
And So it's what's this thing that excites me, whether it be first thing in the morning or something going to happen in that. Maybe it's the people in my life. And sometimes it's reframing too. Maybe I don't think about the people enough in terms of the hope they offer to make that my invitation to get out of bed this morning. So hope is what I get out of bed in the morning for.
Nice. Well, we're wrapping things up. But before we let you go, do you have any final words of wisdom to share with our listeners?
I share this often when I teach about ACEs. I always share a baby picture of my firstborn. And, I share this idea, if you think about it, all babies come into the world like really lost, probably without much hope, right? And if you think about it, they've spent, 9 months roughly in the dark. They've kind of got very familiar with this space that they're in.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, like without much notice, we introduce them to this world, and there's lights and there's people running all over, and it's just chaos. But in that moment, and again, this gets back to the brain and how it starts to develop, but in that moment, a baby's sense of hope becomes somebody showing up. I love Dr. Kurt Thompson has this quote and says, "We all come into the world looking for somebody looking for us." And to me, that's hope, right? A baby comes into the world looking, whether it's mama show up, daddy show up, nurse show up. Literally, a baby doesn't survive if somebody doesn't show up. So
Right.
Our hope for life is people showing up in our life. And to me, that's a great example of how powerful what happens in early life is to our overall life, because I would argue for most of us, that's our hope today. Our hope is measured by, if I'm going through something challenging today, who's going to show up? How many people do I have will show up? And turns out, if I just have one person that's going to show up. And so my message is for folks to never underestimate the power of showing up for somebody in your life. Like that may be the grandest gesture of hope that they've ever received, that they will ever receive.
Right.
There's a lot of talk, there's been a lot of research done in the last couple of years about the loneliness epidemic and just how loneliness is physically tearing people apart. And people may ask, why? How is that physically tearing them apart? Well, if you're living in a challenge in life, and if you're honest with yourself, all of us kind of are, and nobody's going to show up, what kind of stress does your body have to hold on to? How much hope are you living without, right? If you're sitting here and I'm struggling to eat, I'm struggling to pay bills, I'm struggling to get to the doctor to pick up my insulin medicine, whatever, because I don't have a ride, you're living with that burden. And you don't have any hope that anybody's going to show up to help ease that burden. So, my message is more and more, louder and louder, that we have a lot of things going on in this world, but we are each other's answer. We're never going to out-problem that. We are always each other's answer. So I go back to the baby picture. We come into this world needing another human being to be our answer. Sadly, as we grow, the world starts to teach us that there are other answers in life. But then we keep getting reminded over and over through tragedies and through hardships. Nope. It's still as simple as that baby picture. We are still each other's hope. I say all the time that, life is not a you thing. It goes against culture and individualism, but life is not a you thing, it's a we thing. And so I think that's beautiful for a community. I've told you all in this meeting, I've told you all before, I love my time in Southwest Virginia, because when I'm in Southwest Virginia, I always feel like we have each other's back. So that's it.
I think that's a great way to wrap it up. Yeah. So thank you, Keith.
Thank you, Keith. Yeah.
For your time, all that you do to support our work, and just for being a great guy.
Yeah, well, I No, well, I appreciate like the work y'all do here. Big fan of the Hope campaign, and not so much because it's a great campaign, because I know the heart's behind it, the intent behind it, and I see, the momentum it has, and I think it came out here. I'm a pretty big believer that hope is found in what we do with one another. So I appreciate y'all doing this.
Thanks, Keith. Thanks for listening to Voices of Hope.
If you enjoyed today's conversation, we'd love for you to rate and review the podcast and help us spread the word.
Voices of Hope is a production of New River Valley Community Services.
To learn more or listen to past episodes, visit nrvcs.org/podcast.
And remember, hope grows when we share it.
So keep the conversation going, and we'll talk to you next time on Voices of Hope.